All right, we're back for another episode in the concussion series, and this is episode 3. In this episode, what I wanted to discuss is something called second impact syndrome. And more importantly, as an athlete, how do I know when it's safe for me to return to play and get back out on the field? So my name is Dr. Matthew Shim. I am the owner of Peak Brain Performance Centers here in Colorado Springs. And the first thing that I wanted to discuss is just kind of doing a broad overview of what a concussion really is. In the first episode, we kind of delved deep and went over the nitty gritty of what a concussion is and what actually happens to your brain whenever you have a concussion. So if you want to learn more about that, head on over to episode 1. But just to do an overview for this episode here, by definition, a concussion is an injury induced by a direct or indirect biomechanical force that's transmitted to the head. And so what I mean by that is you don't necessarily have to get hit in the head in order to have a concussion. All it has to be is a force that's transmitted to the head. So whether you're hitting the body, whether you whiplash your neck, whether you're involved in a blast injury where there's sound waves that are coming through the air, all these different things could lead you to experiencing a concussion or concussion-like symptoms, right? And so another important thing is that it results in a reversible clinical syndrome manifested as signs and symptoms affecting physical, cognitive, emotional, and or sleep domains. And so that's important because there are so many different ways that a concussion can present, and there's so many different ways that a concussion can affect you. And so I think it's important for you as the patient to be able to find a provider who is adequately trained in the management and treatment of concussion so that you can get the most appropriate care for your unique brain injury, right? Instead of going to somebody who is going to give you some generic one-size-fits-most recovery program, okay? And something else that we discussed in the first episode was something called the Neurometabolic Cascade. And in the center of the screen here, you'll see what's a neuron. And on the right side of the screen, you see that round area with the feet on it. And that part of the neuron is called the soma and the dendrites. That's kind of like the ear and the brain of the neuron. That's how that neuron receives signals from other neurons and processes what it means. And then that long process that goes out to the right is the axon. And the axon is kind of like the mouth of the neuron. That part of the neuron sends its signals to other neurons, okay? So just like how I'm sitting here, I'm using my mouth to speak, you're using your ears to listen to what I'm saying, and then your brain processes it so you can put it together and make sense of what I'm saying, right? Same kind of deal happens here. And then what you also see in this picture is all these positive and negative ions all over the place. And you'll see that on the inside of the cell, there's a lot of negative ions. And on the outside of the cell, there's a lot of positive ions. So the important factor here is that after a concussion, what happens is these ions switch, okay? And what happens is these positive ions start to flood in and the negative ions start to go out. And this is opposite of what the normal resting metabolic state of this neuron is, okay? And so what has to happen now is once you have this concussion, your brain has to work overtime to be able to get this neuron back to its normal resting state and get those positive neurons back to the outside of the negative ions back to the inside. And you can imagine that that requires a lot of energy. So more on what this presentation is about is something called second impact syndrome, also known as repetitive head injury syndrome. And what that is a condition in which an individual experiences a second head injury before complete recovery from the initial head injury. So in the first presentation, you may remember this graph a little bit, but basically you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, on the x-axis, there's energy and there's 100% at the top. And so what happens is whenever I get hit, your brain has to work overtime, right, to be able to pump those positive ions back out and the negative ions back in, and that requires energy. And so for the first 5 to 7 days, your brain is working overtime to be able to get those ions back to where they're supposed to be. And so that's why in the first 5 to 7 days, you'll probably feel your worst, you'll probably feel really tired because you're using up all this energy to be able to do this really fundamental cellular task, right? And then what happens is you start to rise back up again and your energy stores start to replete. And so what happens is within about 7 to 10 days, typically in a normal healthy individual, that's when their symptoms will start to subside. And this is where athletes get in a lot of trouble because you're not out of the woods yet. So what a lot of athletes will say is, I feel fine. My symptoms are starting to go away. I don't have a headache anymore. I'm not dizzy anymore. I'm not nauseous anymore. And so I want to get back out on the field. And so this is where they get in trouble because while you may feel better, that energy crisis and that neurometabolic cascade is not completely over. And according to the literature, that could last up to 4 to 6 weeks, okay? And so what happens is now you go back out on the field, and it could be for a multitude of different reasons. And we've all been there, where either maybe you don't want to let your team down. Maybe you're the star player. You don't want to let your team down. You don't want to let your coach down. You don't want to let your family down. Maybe there's important people in the stands that are coming to watch you play. Maybe there's a whole host of different reasons that you could try to get out on the field back before you're ready. And so what happens is whenever you get back out on the field, within that 7 to 10 days, or after that 7 to 10 days, but before the 4 to 6 week period, what happens if you get hit again is you go through this energy crisis again, and all those ions go crazy again, and they're all in the wrong place, and your brain has to work overtime again. So what happens now is you don't quite make it all the way up to 100%, then you tank again. And typically what happens is you'll tank a little bit further, right? And then that's what's depicted right here in the second peak. And then what happens is you feel like crap again, and then you start to feel a little bit less symptomatic. You get back onto the field, and then you get hit again. And then what happens throughout this whole thing is you end up prolonging your recovery time, and you may even be causing persistent or permanent damage to your brain, where you now have these symptoms for a long while, right? And so I think that this presentation here depicts the importance of you being able to find a provider who can adequately assess your brain and your nervous system to be able to tell you, I don't think it's a right time right now. Your brain is still healing before you can get out on the field, versus maybe you have completely healed and you're ready to get back out on the field. So thanks for joining today's class. I hope you were able to learn something. If you want to talk to me, go ahead and email me or give me a call. Other than that, I hope you have a great day, and I'll talk to you in the next one.